For the first time in years, Notre Dame enters spring practice with the same starting quarterback that they had the season before. Now, as for the rest of the offense, there are a lot more questions, and we have our first projected depth chart for the 2026 season coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome in to Locked On Irish, your daily home for Notre Dame football. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame. Now I'm a producer at Fox Sports, and I've been covering the Irish since 2020. It is Wednesday, February 11th, and thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you're watching along on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, or if you're listening to the podcast, make sure you follow along on your preferred platform. And don't forget, get those Friday mailbag questions in right now in the YouTube comments, or you can send them in on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. The winter games are on, and there is no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. All right, we are coming to you live from parts unknown. It is very late at night for me, so this could be a pretty short episode. But spring practice for Notre Dame is just over a month away, so we have plenty to talk about today. I'm revealing how I think Notre Dame's offensive depth chart will look when they first hit the field, not how it ends. This is just how I believe it's going to start. Obviously, CJ Carr finally has the keys to the offense for a full practice session for the first time in his career, but there are a lot of moving parts around him. We're also going to dive into all the different options at wide receiver and why I think the offensive line is going to be the most important and the most interesting position group to watch all spring. But let's start with the quarterback position. Everyone knows who the starter is going to be. That's going to be CJ Carr. The backup is a big question mark. We've talked about it at length on the show already, but I think at the start of spring practice, Blake Hebert, the redshirt freshman, is going to get the initial backup reps. Behind him, you've got Noah Grubbs, who's going to be a true freshman, but Teddy Girard, who is reclassifying from the class of 2027 to the class of 2026, is not going to be on campus for spring practice. He's not going to enroll until the summer. So Notre Dame is going to have 3 scholarship quarterbacks, and 2 of them are going to be battling it out to be the backup. It's pretty nice not having a quarterback competition for Notre Dame, maybe not for me in terms of the content game, because there was all kinds of different things to talk about with Steve Angeli, CJ Carr, and Kenny Minchey all battling it out last year. But it's obviously very good that CJ Carr is not going to have to split reps. And as I alluded to earlier, this is his room, this is his offense, this is his team. He's not going to be splitting reps. He's not going to be fighting for the starting spot. Everyone knows it's going to be him. I am really interested to see how Gino Guidugli, the quarterback's coach, rotates between Hebert and Grubbs as the backup. I think Hebert is going to get the first reps because he's older, but what if Grubbs goes out there and he proves himself early? Would Gino be willing to move Hebert to third string by the end of spring practice? I don't know. It remains to be seen. And I've heard some people say that I'm pretty harsh on Hebert. I mean, you can say what you want about what I'm saying, but just look at the actions taken by the Notre Dame coaching staff. They are the ones who encouraged Teddy Girard to get on campus as soon as possible. Marcus Freeman said nothing but good things about Noah Grubbs at his signing day press conference. So I think when you read between the lines here, you kind of see the dynamic at play in that quarterback room. Now, I do think Blake Hebert brings some things to the table. He's got size. He's got athletic ability. So if Notre Dame was in a tight spot at quarterback, could they bring in Hebert and just pound the rock with him, maybe run some read option? That's always a possibility, but they need a viable backup option. Hebert and Grubbs are going to get their first crack at it, and then once Teddy Girard rolls around in the summer, he's going to have his opportunity as well. So not a ton to discuss there at quarterback, but there are plenty of intriguing options at running back. We all know Aeneas Williams is going to be the starter. That's clear cut. Who's going to be number 2? Well, it could be Nolan James Jr. It could be Kedron Young, although I'm not sure how healthy Kedron Young is going to be at the start of spring practice. He's only going to be 7 months removed from his ACL tear that he suffered last training camp back in August. So I don't expect him to be taking contact or anything like that. So I think it's going to go Aeneas Williams, Nolan James Jr., and then Javian Osborne and Jonas Walton, the 2 incoming freshmen there. They're going to be at 3 and 4. Anything they can get out of Kedron Young, I think, is a bonus in this situation. But considering Kedron Young is likely going to be out, Nolan James Jr. being the redshirt freshman, the veteran of all the backups there, at least the ones that are available, I think he's going to start at the backup running back. And in a similar way to the quarterback position, I'm excited to see how Ja'Juan Seider splits up these reps, because last year there was a clear 1 and there was a clear 2. Jeremiah Love was going to start. Jadarian Price, it was going to be right behind him, and they got the bulk of the carries, not just in practice, but in the games. Now they have a bunch of different options because Nolan James has plenty to prove this year, and specifically this spring practice. I know the staff is very high on Javian Osborne and what he could do for this team, even though he's a true freshman. He's built like a college football running back. He's 5'9", 197 pounds, but so is Jonas Walton. And even though Javian Osborne has a little bit more hype as he starts his college career, I wouldn't count out Jonas Walton. Both those guys are top 150 prospects in the country. There's a reason why Ja'Juan Seider wanted them, but I think that he's going to have to distribute these carries pretty evenly, at least among Osborne, Walton, and Nolan James Jr. Aeneas Williams is going to get the bulk of his reps. Obviously, he's going to be out there with the ones, getting a lot of action. And this is not going to be a situation like last spring practice where Notre Dame was just coming off a 16-game season. A ton of guys were resting throughout that spring because the starters had just basically had 2 more extra months of practice. There was no reason for Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price to be out there taking hits all day in practice. But like every single person I just mentioned in this room, Williams, Nolan James Jr., Osborne, and Walton, like those guys are fresh. Those guys are healthy. Keidron Young is not healthy, but as soon as he's able to get back out there on the field, they're going to try to work him really hard as well. So it's just such a different dynamic at play for Seider this year compared to last year. And I think he's a great coach. He's an excellent recruiter. He certainly hit the ground running the moment he took this job. But now he gets to put his own imprint on this room. First by bringing in Osborne and by bringing in Walton, but now he gets to sort of experiment with Williams, with James Jr., and Young once he's able to get back out there on the field. Because last year, like Seider's job was pretty easy. Hey, put in Jeremiah Love or put in Jadarian Price, and both those guys are going to excel. That's not to say that all these guys aren't talented, but I think that it's on Seider to maximize what each one of these guys brings to the table. Does that mean he's going to expand the rotation beyond just 2 guys? I don't know. It's a possibility. He didn't really do that when he was at Penn State. When he was the running backs coach at Penn State, it was Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen getting the bulk of the carries, but it is important to point out that once Ja'Juan Seider left Penn State, the production for Singleton and Allen fell off quite a bit. So I'm just really excited to see what Ja'Juan Seider can do with all these different backs. They're all talented. They all bring different things to the table here. And now with an offense that is going to lean a little bit more heavily on the passing game with CJ Carr, the running backs are still going to be a big part of the offense, but I just think they're going to be asked to do different things and not just carry the bulk of the load. So very interesting position battle as we wait and see here for the Notre Dame running backs, but that is going to be a very interesting position to watch come spring practice. All right, we know who the quarterback is. We already talked about how the running back room is loaded, not just in terms of talent, but also intriguing options. But if Notre Dame wants this offense to really take the next step, it starts on the outside. So let's talk about the wide receivers and tight ends coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the move. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, like skills, certifications, and location. If I were hiring, I wouldn't just want someone who can help. I'd want someone with real experience who can jump right in. That's what I like about Indeed. You can get specific and target exactly what you need. It saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches, and with sponsored jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events, to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. There are all kinds of events you can bet on, from the drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast, to speed skating races decided by inches. And of course, you have hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off. Even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Welcome back to Locked On Irish. Today, we are predicting Notre Dame's offensive depth chart before the start of spring practice. But before we get to the depth chart, I wanted to remind you that if you have not already, make sure you check out our new Everydayer Club. You'll get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Irish. It is the same show, same schedule, just no ads, and it works on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. If you listen every day, it's a really easy upgrade. Just go to lockedonirish.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, now let's dive into the wide receiver position. And Notre Dame likes to run a lot of 13 personnel, so you're going to have 3 starting wide receivers on the field at once. Let's start off with the field wide receiver, which Notre Dame calls the X wide receiver. Typically, in most offenses, the boundary is the X, but not in Notre Dame's scheme. They call the field receiver the X. We know who's going to be the starter. It's going to be Jordan Faison. And then right behind him, I think you're going to have Mylan Graham, the incoming transfer from Ohio State. And then Elijah Burris at 3. He's going to be a redshirt freshman this year. And then Jerome Bettis Jr. at 4. And Dylan Faison, Jordan's younger brother, at 5. No big surprises here, but this is going to be Jordan Faison's first full spring practice window now that he has retired from lacrosse. I'm sure that the Notre Dame men's lacrosse team was disappointed because Jordan Faison was a big-time contributor for them as well. But hey, they get his younger brother, Dylan, once he's on campus, and Dylan is an exceptional player. I think he was the number 1 lacrosse recruit in the entire country. So they lose Jordan, but they are going to gain Dylan this year. And I don't expect Dylan to make a huge dent on the football field this fall. So I think the majority of his focus, at least, will be tied up into lacrosse. But now, this is a huge year for Jordan Faison. And the reason that he retired from lacrosse is because he sees a future in the league, in the NFL, at wide receiver. I've said it before, Jordan Faison just seems like a perfect fit for a Shanahan-type offense with the 49ers, or maybe he goes the Rams with McVay, or the Vikings with KOC. Like, if he gets drafted by the right team, Jordan Faison could have a great career in the NFL because he's a great route runner, great hands, very slippery, and also he's a great blocker despite the fact that he's a little bit undersized. So he's going to start at field, but then Mylan Graham is going to be there right behind him. And Notre Dame really, really wanted to get Graham from Ohio State. Marcus Freeman made him a priority. He was able to get him. The thing about Graham, though, and Faison is they can move around. They can play in the field. They can play in the slot. So I think Graham is going to start off as Faison's backup, but expect him to be on the field early and often. But then you have Elijah Burris, who was really one of the stars of spring practice last year just because Malachi Fields wasn't out there yet. A lot of the other wide receivers were dealing with injuries, or you had Faison, who was practicing with the lacrosse team. So they just didn't really have that many able bodies at the position. And Elijah Burris took advantage of that as an early enrollee freshman. This year, the circumstances are a little bit different. The room is a lot more crowded, but he's going to still have to go out there and make some plays because, like I said, with the additions of Graham and Porter, and you got guys coming back like Faison, like Greathouse, and then some younger guys who are ready to emerge, it's going to be a little bit harder for Burris to separate himself. But Mike Denbrock said going to last season that he believes that Burris could be elite. He just had to get a better grasp of the playbook. Now going into year 2, he's expected to have a much better grasp of that, and he's going to have to start utilizing that and putting that on the field, and then he can become one of the regulars in the rotation. Next up, we've got slot wide receiver. Notre Dame calls that the Z. Jane Greathouse is the projected starter there. And then right behind him, I think you're going to have Logan Soldate, who's going to be a redshirt sophomore, Matt Jeffrey, Bubba Frazier, and Braden Robinson, the 2 incoming freshmen. And look, I have Jane Greathouse slotted in here. It looks like he's going to be a full participant after a very disappointing season for him last year. He played the first 4 games. He only had 8 total targets on the year. and we had really high hopes for him coming off those last 2 games of the 2024 season when he had over 100 receiving yards and a touchdown against Penn State, and then he had 2 touchdowns against Ohio State in the national championship, but it just didn't materialize. And once he went down, Will Pauling, the transfer from Wisconsin, stepped up. He was named captain. He had a great season. He finished with 6 receiving touchdowns. So, the loss of Jaden Greathouse was not really felt that much last year because Pauling stepped in, but Notre Dame really needs Jaden Greathouse to contribute this year. His style of play is a little bit different than Will Pauling, but there are a few guys on this team who have proven they can go out there and make contested catches like Jaden Greathouse. So this is a very big spring practice for him to go back out there and prove himself like, yeah, I am that player that was going off and making plays on the biggest stage of the college football playoff. But then behind him, the everyday viewers and listeners of this show know that I'm pretty high on Logan Saldate, even though he has not really done anything on the field on Saturdays for Notre Dame. I just really like his game. He's not very big, but he's very shifty. He's fast. He has good hands. He was a player who's making waves during training camp last year, but he just wasn't able to beat out the veterans ahead of him. But this is a big time for him because there's really only one guy ahead of him. Last year was 2 with Greathouse and Pauling. Now it's just Greathouse. But if he can go out there and make some plays and put some pressure on Greathouse, I think that's a good thing. I think that's going to bring out the best in both of those guys. But then behind them, I don't really expect Jeffrey to play a ton this year. He did get some reps last year when Notre Dame was in obvious run situations, which, again, probably shows you why they were struggling in short yardage situations because they were so thin at tight end that they needed to bring in Matt Jeffrey to make some blocks. But still, he proved that he has some value at that position. And then I'm just not expecting a ton from Bubba Frazier or Braden Robinson as receivers this season. All right, up next, we got boundary wide receiver. Notre Dame calls that the W. I like Micah Gilbert to get the first reps here. He's the veteran of this group, right? He's going into his 3rd season with the program. It's tough. It was a tough season for him last year. He got hurt on literally the very first practice, maybe even the first drill of spring practice last year. And I think I said he was going to be one of the stars of spring practice going into it last year. So that prediction did not come true, but I think he's going to go out there with the ones to start things off. But then he's got Quincy Porter right behind him, the other transfer from Ohio State, 6'4", 197 pounds, former 5-star. He's only going to be in his 2nd year of college football, but the guy has all-world potential. I still think Gilbert is going to get the first reps. And then, hey, speaking of former 5-stars, Cam Williams is probably going to be the 3rd boundary wide receiver at the start of spring practice. And then I'm kind of guessing here. I've got Kadon Finley and Devin Fitzgerald Jr. as the 4 and 5 at boundary. Finley could play anywhere. He could play boundary, he could play slot, he could play field. But right now I'm projecting him at boundary just because he's a little bit bigger. Maybe not in terms of height. He's only 6'1", but he's 200 pounds. And I just think that the clearest path for Kadon Finley to get on the field as a freshman is at boundary. And then Devin Fitzgerald, he is a little bit taller, so I just think he makes sense there. Quincy Porter is going to be one of the most interesting players to watch on the entire roster this spring because he has incredible upside, like I said, all-world potential, but he's coming off knee surgery, as a matter of fact, that held him out at the end of the year in his freshman season at Ohio State. But Jeremiah Smith, if you've heard of him, said that Quincy Porter was going to be the next great Ohio State wide receiver back when they were both still Buckeyes. Obviously, it didn't turn out as well for Quincy Porter in his freshman year, but if Notre Dame gets that player that was making Jeremiah Smith impressed, that'd be huge for this wide receiver room. And I think at this point, it's make or break time for Cam Williams. If he doesn't do anything in spring, I just think he's going to get passed up. Or maybe this is the time where we finally see why he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. So this is a very interesting group as well when you think about the fact that you've got 2 former 5-stars. You've got Micah Gilbert, who was the star of spring practice 2 years ago, back when he was an early enrollee freshman, had 2 touchdowns in his first blue and gold game. And then you got Kadon Finley and Devin Fitzgerald Jr., just some very exciting freshmen coming in as well. So Notre Dame has a lot of unproven talent at wide receiver, but man, a lot more talent they have had than in many years in the past. I want to quickly touch on the tight ends before we shift over to the offensive line. Cooper Flanagan is likely going to be the starter for his first real action since he ruptured his Achilles over a year ago against Georgia in the college football playoff. Yes, he did get in for that one game against USC. Maybe they would have tried to put him out there a little bit more if Notre Dame had actually played in the playoffs, but I think it was probably best to rest him because a ruptured Achilles is not something to mess around with. So the fact that he was able to get some more time, rest, and now he enters this spring where he should be healthy or at least close to it because it's going to be over 13 months removed from his injury. I'm sure they're going to have a plan for him, so they're not just like putting him out there and he's going 110% all the time. But it's very good for Notre Dame to have him back. He's the best blocking tight end they have right now. He's also the biggest tight end. He's not going to be the downfield receiving threat that Eli Raridon was, but it's still a very valuable tight end in that room. Ty Washington is probably going to start as the backup, but keep an eye on James Flanagan. He's going to be a redshirt freshman. Flanagan is a really good blocker, and even though he didn't contribute a lot last year, the coaching staff is really high on him. So even though Washington is probably going to get the backup reps to start, I expect Flanagan to push him, and I think that's good for both parties because Washington has talent. We've seen it flash before, flash at Arkansas as well, and then you've got Flanagan, who's like that up-and-comer. Hopefully it brings out the best in both of those guys. And then Jack Larson is probably going to be the fourth tight end. He has also been a guy who has had some really nice catches, but he's just not quite as big as the other guys, so I think blocking is an issue for him, and blocking is probably going to be an issue for Preston Frizzell, at least to start. The other incoming freshman, not the five-star Ian Premer, who I think was really underrated as a high school recruit. He's probably going to have a very good collegiate career, but he's probably going to need some time to develop physically in the weight room and then learn the college game as well. I do not have Ian Premer on this depth chart right now because he is not set to enroll until the summer, but very talented group. Very excited to see what those guys can do on the field this year. All right. We've talked about the quarterback, the running back, the wide receivers, and the tight ends. Frankly, none of that matters if Notre Dame does not have a really, really good offensive line going into next year. But who is going to start? Well, whoever starts out in the first practice spring might be totally different than what we see in the fall. But let's take a guess at who that first unit is going to be when Notre Dame takes the field for spring practice here next month.
I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. Dawn Staley and South Carolina remain on top of the SEC standings after handing Tennessee their worst defeat in program history with a final score of 93-40. In the 43-point win, South Carolina shot 69% from the field. Tessa Johnson had a perfect shooting night, scoring 24 points, shooting 4 for 4 from the floor, including 2 threes, and made all 4 of her free throws. And UCLA remains undefeated in Big Ten play, topping Michigan 69-66 as Player of the Year contender Lauren Betts put up a double-double, scoring 16 points, collecting 16 rebounds, and adding 5 assists and 3 blocks. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts the same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
All right, we are back here on Locked On Irish predicting Notre Dame's offensive depth chart at the start of spring practice. Now, as a reminder, this is just who I believe is going to be the first team that goes out there on the practice field. This is not a prediction for who is going to start for this Notre Dame offense when they take the field against Wisconsin at Lambeau. We are way too far away from that moment for me to be making any definitive projections there. But considering Notre Dame starts spring practice next spring, I think we can at least predict who's going to take the first team reps on the practice field. So we've talked about the offensive line at length already on the show throughout the offseason because it is clearly one of the most important storylines on the team, but certainly this offense. So at the start of spring, I think it's going to go Anthony Knapp at left tackle, Sullivan Absher at left guard, Joe Otting at center, Gerby Lambert at right guard, and then Will Black, the redshirt freshman, at right tackle. We know Anthony Knapp is going to be the starter at left tackle. That is probably, outside of CJ Carr, the one I am most confident in. Like, Anthony Knapp is going to be the starter at left tackle for Notre Dame this season. At left guard, until we see Charles Jagasaw come back on the field, I'm going to assume it's going to be Sullivan Absher. Absher replaced Billy Shrouth once he went down with an injury during the USC game last year. Played pretty well there the rest of the season. I know that the staff really liked him going into last year, and now he has a clear path to start until Charles Jagasaw is able to come back, so I expect him there. Ashton Craig is probably not going to be healthy until training camp at like the earliest, so Joe Otting is definitely going to go out with the ones there. I thought Joe Otting did really well. I mean, when he came in for his first start against USC, really made an impact early on in the game. Now, granted, that was a USC defense that was suspect, let's say, but still, I think Otting was a really good player. And then you have Gerby Lambert. Very interesting decision for Joe Rudolph about what he's going to do with Gerby Lambert. He can keep him at right guard, which is where he started all of last season, or he could kick Lambert out to right tackle, which is where he played as a true freshman, and that's where he played in high school. He was a tackle coming out of high school, but Notre Dame wanted to get him on the field last season, and even though he had his lumps early on at guard, I thought by the end of the year he was really, really good. But this is sort of the time in spring practice to mix and match, right? You can try Gerby Lambert at right guard. You could try him at right tackle. You could try Will Black at right tackle. You could also cross-train him at guard as well because Black was doing that last season. There was an opportunity for him to get playing time at guard, so he played some there, and he played some at tackle during some garbage time as well. So that's who I believe is going to be the first team. But then let's go behind them. I'm going to say Styles Prescott at left tackle, Chris Derrick at left guard, Cam Herron, who's going to be a redshirt freshman at center, Peter Jones at right guard, and then Maddie Augustine at right tackle. As we've talked about before, the staff is really high on Maddie Augustine. There is a chance, if Knapp and Will Black are the starting tackles, that Maddie Augustine could be the backup at left tackle and right tackle. There's a chance that Maddie Augustine could beat out Will Black to be the starting right tackle. But I think when you look at the second team unit, that is what makes the most sense, at least at the start. And then you have other tackles like Owen Strabig, who's going to be a redshirt sophomore, Grayson McHugh, who's going to be a freshman, Charlie Tom, another incoming freshman, and then all kinds of different guys on the interior like Devin Houston, who converted over from the defensive line to the offensive line last year, and then some incoming freshmen like Sullivan Garvin, Gregory Patrick, Tyler Merrill, Ben Nichols. I don't think Notre Dame anticipated that they would take 6 offensive linemen in last year's class, but it just sort of worked out that way. A bunch of talented prospects. They were a little bit heavier on the interior than at guard, or than at tackle, I should say, but that's fine because in the class before, they had Strabig, they had Augustine, and they had Will Black there as well. So this is another position. It kind of reminds me of wide receiver where they've recruited well, they have a bunch of talent, but there aren't that many spots where you can say, okay, guarantee that guy is going to start there other than Anthony Knapp, because left guard, center to some extent, right guard and right tackle are all kind of up for grabs. You know Gerby Lambert is going to start. You don't know where. We assume Joe Otting is going to start, but then what happens once Ashton Craig comes back? We don't know. So it's just going to be so fun to watch all the different ways that Joe Rudolph tries to maximize this group. And one thing we know about him, Joe Rudolph is not afraid to surprise us, and whatever we see in spring is not definitive because he can absolutely change that in the fall. He's done it time and time again, and that could certainly happen again this offseason. But as we sit here today, February 11th, I think it's going to be Knapp, Absher, Otting, Lambert, and Black as the first-team unit on the offensive line. All right. That is going to do it for today's episode. Thank you again for making this your first watch or listen of the day. Before you head out, remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow along wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, like the video below, rate the podcast 5 stars, leave a review. It really helps us out. And by the way, if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Irish ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonirish.supercast.com to join the club and keep those mailbag questions coming in the YouTube comments on X at Locked On Irish or on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod. As I mentioned before, I'm on a work trip right now. My schedule is extremely busy. It's all over the place, but I'm going to try to make sure I get another episode in that's going to come out tomorrow in which I'll break down my projected depth chart for the Notre Dame defense at the start of spring practice. I'll see you then.